I recently picked up a copy of this book. It's labelled Old Stone Monuments by J. Fergusson, 1872. Those of you more familiar with a source material on Irish archaeology will know that this is a reprint of a book that was actually originally called Rude Stone Monuments in All Countries, Their Age and Uses by James Fergusson, published in 1872. Now, the reason I picked it up was because I'm already familiar with the work of this man in relation to Loughcrew, and a little bit of controversy in relation to that, especially in relation to who might have been buried at Loughcrew, but that's a subject we will come to and treat in a different video. For tonight, I just wanted to read a couple of pages of Ferguson's work in relation to the archaeology of Loughcrew. Now, modern visitors to Loughcrew will know that the cairns haven't been excavated in recent times. This is a great shame. And the fact that they were excavated in the 19th century leaves us with obvious difficulties. They've taken away a lot of the datable material from the cairns. They were excavated at a time when archaeology was a fledgling discipline. And so, you know, a modern excavation would be extremely valuable. At the same time, the fact that there is some detail of the 19th century excavations is also important. Now, there are two men who are important to the story of the archaeology of Loughcrew. One is Fergusson, and the other is a local man, a Meath man, Eugene Conwell, who carried out the excavations. And so what little information we have in relation to these places is gleaned from these, I suppose, they're, scant or not comprehensive reports. At a distance of 25 miles, nearly due west from Bruneboyne, and 2 miles southeast from Oldcastle, is a range of hills called, on the Ordnance Survey map, Slieve na Calliagh, the Hags or Witches' Hill. It is upwards of 200 feet above the level of the sea, and the most conspicuous elevation in that part of the country. Now, this is Fergusson talking about Loughcrew. On the ridge of this range, which is about 2 miles in extent, are situated from 25 to 30 cairns, some of considerable size, being 120 to 180 feet in diameter. Others are much smaller, and some so nearly obliterated that their dimensions can hardly be now ascertained. Till 7 or 8 years ago, this cemetery was entirely unknown to Irish antiquaries, and the position of the cairns were hardly even indicated in the Ordnance Survey. Now, I very much doubt that these cairns were ever unknown to the local people of the Oldcastle and Loughcrew area. But in 1863 they attracted the attention of Mr. Eugene Conwell of Trim. In the years 1867 to 68 he was enabled, with the assistance and cooperation of the late Mr. Napper of Loughcrew, the proprietor of the soil, to excavate and explore the whole of them. A brief account of the results which he obtained was submitted to the Royal Irish Academy in 1868, and afterwards printed by him for private circulation in 1868. But the greater work, with plans and drawings in which he intends fully to illustrate the whole, is still in abeyance owing to want of encouragement. When completed, it will be one of the most valuable contributions to our archaeological knowledge that we have received of late years. Meanwhile, the following meagre particulars are derived from Mr. Conwell's pamphlet and the information I picked up during a personal visit which I made to the spot in his company in the autumn of last year. The illustrations are all from his drawings. One of the most perfect of these tumuli is that distinguished by Mr. Conwell as Cairn T, and one presumes that it was in fact Eugene Conwell who lettered the cairns. I mean, originally the monuments of Bruneboyne have names, and in the Dinchenicus they're all listed, and some of them are attributed to gods, etc., etc. There are some mysterious sites. I've mentioned some of these in my new book, Mythical Ireland. In particular, the monuments relating to the mysterious monster of Brú-na-Bóinne, who was the Mata. So Conwell appears to have given them letters, and of course the most famous cairn on the hills of Loughcrew is Cairn T. Now Cairn T is the only one for which we actually do have a name from the Ordnance Survey maps, and it was the Hag's Cairn. It stands on the highest point of the hill and is consequently the most conspicuous. It is a truncated cone, 116 feet in diameter at the base, and with a sloping side between 60 and 70 feet in height. Around its base are 37 stones laid on edge and varying from 6 to 12 feet in length. They are not detached, as at Newgrange, but form a retaining wall to the mound. On the north, and set about 4 feet back from the circle, is a large stone, 10 feet long by 6 high and 2 feet thick, weighing consequently above 10 tons. The upper part is fashioned as a rude seat, from which it derives its name of the Hag's Chair, and there can be little doubt but that it was intended as a seat or throne, but whether the king who erected the sepulchre or for what purpose, it is difficult now to say. It's interesting because I tell you what, I've been on the hills of Loughcrew dozens and dozens of times, perhaps several hundred times, and it's not conducive to sitting around, except for on the calmest and warmest days of the summer. It's quite blustery up there. One cannot imagine that a king actually sat there out in the open. On the eastern side of the mound, the stones forming the periphery of the cairn curve inwards for 8 or 9 yards on each side of the spot where the entrance to the chamber commences. It is of the usual cruciform plan and 28 feet long from the entrance to the flat stone closing the innermost cell. The dome, consequently, is not nearly under the centre of the tumulus as at Newgrange, and neither, by the way, is the dome of Newgrange, and lends something like probability to the notion that the cell of Doubt was really the principal sepulchre. 28 of the stones in the chamber were ornamented with devices of various sorts. 2 of them are represented on the accompanying woodcut, which, with the drawings of the Hag's Chair, give a fair idea of their general character. And actually, his drawing of the Hag's Chair is very interesting, because a lot of this megalithic art on the Hag's Chair is not actually visible anymore because it's been severely weathered. They are certainly ruder and less artistic than those on the Boyne, and so far would indicate an earlier age. And of course this is one of the reasons that archaeologists consider the cairns at Loughcrew to be somewhat older than those at Brú-na-Bóinne. Nothing was found in the chambers of this tomb but a quantity of charred human bones, perfect human teeth, mixed with the bones of animals, apparently stags, and one bronze pin, 2.5 inches long, with a head ornamented and stem slightly so, and still preserving a beautiful green polish. Now, let's not be confused here. These chambered cairns are Neolithic. These are dating from the Stone Age. A bronze pin is from the later Bronze Age. And lest anyone be confused in terms of, you know, this debate that we hear so much about in relation to the chambered cairns or the passage tombs. Yeah, I know that people say they mightn't have been tombs, but the evidence, you know, quite simply is that there were lots of human bones, cremated and uncremated, mostly fragmented, found in the chambers of these places. So some sort of rituals around, you know, the placement of bones or the burial of the dead seems to have been an aspect of them. Cairn L, a little further west, is 135 feet in diameter and surrounded by 42 stones, similar to those at Cairn T. The same curve inwards of these stones marks the entrance here, which is placed 18 feet from the outward line of the circle. The chamber here is nearly of the same dimensions as that last described, being 29 feet deep and 13 across its greatest width. In one of the side chambers lies the largest of the mysterious flat basins that have yet been discovered, 5 feet 9 inches long by 3 feet 1 inch broad, the whole being tooled and picked with as much care and skill as if executed by a modern mason. This one has a curious nick in its rim, but as it does not go through, it could hardly be intended as a spout. Till some unrifled tomb is found, or something analogous in other countries, it is extremely difficult to say what the exact use of these great stone saucers might have been. That the body or ashes were laid on them is more than probable, and they may then have been covered over with a lid like a dish cover, such as are found on tombs in southern Babylonia. Under this basin were found great quantities of charred human bones and 48 human teeth, besides a perfectly rounded syenite ball still preserving its original polish, and some jet and other monuments. In other parts were found quantities of charred bones, some rude pottery and bone implements, but no objects in metal. The woodcut representing the cell with large basin gives a fair idea of the general style of sculpture in this and the neighbouring cairns, and that's his rendering of it there. And quite famously, there's this pillar in the chamber of Cairnell that receives the light on the last day at Samhain, the first day of winter, I suppose, the last day that the sun shines in there, and the reflected light casts onto the megalithic art on the stone at the back of this recess, which is nicely illustrated in a photograph by Martin Byrne taken in Cairnell a long time ago, which is featured in my new book, Mythical Ireland. The parts cross-hatched seem to have been engraved with a sharp metal tool. Now, of course, this was before we knew the absolute date of these sites, or the rough date of them, as it were. And there was no metal used in the incising of the megalithic art on the chambered cairns of Ireland. The ordinary forms, however, both here and on the Boyne, are picked, but whether they were executed with a hammer or pick direct, or by a chisel driven by a hammer, is by no means clear. My own impression is that it would be very difficult indeed to execute these patterns with a hammer of any sort, and that a chisel must have been used, but whether of flint, bronze or iron, there is no evidence to show. Cairn H, though only between 5 and 6 feet in height and 54 feet in diameter, seems to have been the only one on the hill not previously rifled, and this is very interesting, and yielded a most astonishing collection of objects to its explorer. The cell was of the usual cruciform plan, 24 feet from the entrance to the rear, and 16 feet across the lateral chambers. In the passage and crypts of this cairn, Mr. Conwell collected some 300 fragments of human bones, which must have belonged to a considerable number of separate individuals, 14 fragments of rude pottery, 10 pieces of flint, 155 seashells in a perfect condition, besides pebbles and small polished stones in quantities. Now, one of the fascinating things is that, you know, these items were apparently all given to the museum. He says that, in the next paragraph. The most remarkable part of the collection consisted of 4,884 fragments, more or less perfect, of bone implements. These are now in the Dublin Museum and look like the remains of a paper knife maker's stock in trade. Now, we can assume that some of the bone material from the cairns extracted by Eugene Conwell are to be found somewhere in the museum. In recent years, bones from Sligo, from I think Carrowmore, excavated by Professor R.A.S. McAllister in the early 20th century, which were thought to be lost, were later recovered and examined and dated. So there is a possibility that some of this material described by Fergusson, excavated by Conwell, is somewhere in the museum and yet to be dated. And that could throw some exciting light on perhaps the dating of the cairns at Slieve na Calliagh. And in relation to these bone implements, he says most of them are of a knife shape, and almost all more or less polished, but without further ornamentation. But 27 fragments appear to have been stained, 11 perforated, 501 engraved with rows of fine lines, 13 combs were engraved on both sides, and 91 engraved by compass with circles and curves of a high order of art. On one, in cross-hatched lines, is the representation of an antlered stag, the only attempt to depict a living thing in the collection. And that's interesting. Of course, all of these items, it would be really exciting to see the entire collection and to have, you know, a modern expert's view as to what they were. And of course, if there's a representation of a stag, one wonders whether these items might be Neolithic or much later, because one of the things we don't see in megalithic art on the chambered cairns of Loughcrew and Sligo and the Boyne Valley and everywhere else are representational art or representational forms. We don't see anthropomorphic figures, we don't see animals, etc. Besides these, there were found in this cairn 7 beads of amber, 3 small beads of glass of different colours, 2 fragments, and a curious molten drop of glass, 1 inch long, trumpet-shaped at one end and tapering towards the other extremity, 6 perfect and 8 fragments of bronze rings, and 7 specimens of iron implements, but all, as might be expected, very much corroded by rust. One of these presents all the appearance of being the leg of a compass, with which the bone implements may have been engraved, and one was an iron punch 5 inches long, with a chisel-shaped point, bearing evidence of the use of the mallet at the opposite end. Cairn D, now this is Cairn D on Cairn Bon, or what we would call Cairn Ban West today, is the largest and most important monument of the group, being 180 feet in diameter, and though it is very much dilapidated, the circle of 54 stones which originally surrounded it can still be traced. On its eastern side, the stones curve inwards for about 12 paces, in the form universal in these cairns. But though the explorers set to work industriously to follow out what they considered a sure, quotes, find, they could not penetrate the mound. The stones fell in upon them so fast, and the risk they ran was so great, that they were forced to abandon the idea of tunnelling, and though a large body of men worked assiduously for a fortnight trying to work down from above, they failed to penetrate to the central or any other chambers. It still, therefore, remains a mystery if there is a blind tope like many in India, or whether its secret still remains to reward some fortunate set of explorers. If it has no central chamber, the curving inwards of its outer circle of stones is a curious instance of adherence to a sacred form. Now, visitors to Loughcrew, especially if you've ever been to Cairn Ban West, which is on private land, by the way, always ask for permission, will be familiar with Cairn D, because it's got this huge sort of trench into it where, you know, Conwell and his workers basically tried to remove stone from the top of the cairn and work their way downwards, but eventually gave up. And of course they didn't restore it to the fashion that they had found it in, or to the state that they had found it in, unfortunately. One of the exciting things about this is that if Cairn D does have a chamber or several chambers, it may be that a future archaeological excavation will find datable material, and we may have some sort of an answer to the question about the age of these cairns. The other monuments on the hill do not represent any features worth enumerating in a general summary like the present, though they would be most interesting in a monograph. Though differing greatly in size and in richness of ornamentation, they all belong to one class and apparently to one age. For our present purpose, one of the most interesting peculiarities is that, like the group on the banks of the Boyne, this is essentially a cemetery. There are no circles, no alignments, no dolmens, no rude stone monuments, in fact. All are carefully built and all more or less ornamented, and there is a gradation and progression throughout the whole series, widely different in this respect from the simplicity and rudeness of the English monuments described in the last chapter. Now the next bit I'm just going to read as a tantalising opening to a video that I will do later. It now only remains to try to ascertain who those were who were buried in this tumuli, and when they were laid there to their rest. And I'm not going to continue on that line of inquiry at the moment, because I want to do a separate video about that and to examine some of the myths about Loughcrew and who or what it might have been about, or consecrated to, etc., etc. In the meantime, the cairns at Loughcrew are the cairns at Slieve na Calliagh at Loughcrew are open to visitors, as it were, on the equinoxes, spring equinox in March and autumn equinox in September. The rising sun shines into the chamber of Cairns and lights up the stone at the back of the end recess, and it's quite a beautiful visual spectacle. It's a fabulous landscape anyway. These places are located on the top of a hill that's 900 and something, I think it's 980 feet above sea level, with spectacular beautiful views across the landscape. And of course, quite often if you go there early in the morning, you've got this mist that's and fog that clings the valley below or the landscape below, and you're almost above it, and it can be quite magical. Anyway, today is the 13th of September, so if you're watching this before the autumn equinox, you might get a chance to actually visit Loughcrew on one of the days in which it's open to the public by the OPW early in the morning of, I think this year, actually I'll just check my calendar as I'm talking to you. Yeah, I think it's Friday the 21st, Saturday the 22nd, and Sunday the 23rd of September. In addition to that, you may be interested in a walk that's taking place from Patrickstown Hill, which is the fourth or the easternmost hill of the range of hills at Loughcrew, from Patrickstown to Cairns, and that walk is being led by local guide Malachy Hand in conjunction with myself, and we'll be giving you some of the archaeology and the history and the mythology and folklore of the area as we undertake the walk. If you want to book tickets for that, they're only €5, and that's to cover transport to take us to Patrickstown and back. That is payable online, and the tickets are available on the Loughcrew Megalithic Centre Facebook page. In the meantime, if you have any inquiries, drop me a line. It's mythicalireland@gmail.com, or of course on my Facebook page, which is facebook.com/mythicalireland, and I'd be glad if I can to answer any query that you might have. In the meantime, thanks for watching this video. This video will be available first and foremost to my Patreon patrons for a while, as a reward for their support of my endeavours, and then after a while it will be made generally publicly available. Thanks a million.